It started with the accident nobody saw. Mark always drove home the same empty county road after closing his auto shop, a straight ribbon of asphalt flanked by winter bare oaks and busted fence posts. No traffic lights, no turns, yet sometime after midnight a passing trucker spotted his sedan buried nose-deep in a drainage ditch, its hood folded like corrugated tin. By the time I reached County General, Mark was ventilated, IV-laced and motionless, eyes half-lidded beneath tape you could almost mistake for sleep, if not for the rasping rhythm of the machine that breathed for him. The doctors called it non-responsive and sidestepped every hopeful question with practiced softness, like real words might fracture whatever fragile thing still tethered him to us. I signed forms because his mother couldn't stop shaking long enough to hold a pen, listened to monitors ping, and wondered if Mark could tell I was there by the damp of my palms on his wrist. I stayed that first night in the step-down lounge, dozing in a plastic chair while orderlies murmured in the corridor. The next days blurred, work, hospital, home, repeat, until I learned the subtle choreography of his ward, which nurse tightened which strap, what button silenced which alarm. By the third week even hope had adapted, downsizing into smaller daily bargains if his pupils flicker, if a finger twitches, if a number on the ventilator dips. But Mark remained a still life. The only thing that changed was me, a version of myself defined by fluorescent buzz and the medicinal smell that hitchhiked on my clothes. I live alone in a one-bedroom above a pawn shop. That Tuesday night I was scrolling mindlessly, half asleep on the sofa, television glowing mute blue across leftover noodles, when my phone rang. The screen read Mark's cell. I froze so hard the phone nearly went to voicemail before I answered, pulse drumming in my throat. "Mark?" White hiss filled the line, like wind across a microphone. Then a voice I hadn't heard since his last barbecue, low and deliberate, as though he were leaning close to a phone booth receiver. "What are they doing with my body?" Before I could stammer a response, the call dropped. No click, no dial tone, just silence and my own breathing, suddenly too loud in the apartment. I stared at the screen until it dimmed, then opened the call log. 5 seconds had passed. I replayed the audio in my head, testing every vowel against memory. It was his voice, unmistakable gravel softened by cigarette filters and late nights singing along to old rock stations. My rational brain sprinted for explanations, spoofed numbers, some cruel scammer, a hallucination spun from exhaustion. Yet each theory tripped over itself. The number was his, still locked in a drawer at County General, according to his mother. Even if someone had cloned the SIM, how would they capture his precise cadence, the faint rasp of his childhood asthma? I texted back, "You shouldn't be able to call me. Who is this?" But blue bubbles hung unread. I hardly slept. At dawn I drove straight to the hospital. The ward hummed with morning routines, food carts, nurse banter, the antiseptic hush before visiting hours. Mark looked unchanged. A plastic-sheathed cell phone still sat in the drawer beneath his chart, powered off to conserve charge. I checked the message icon. Nothing. The nurse on duty humored my questions until policy turned the conversation into a shrug. "Phones don't dial themselves, Mr. Baker. Maybe someone spoofed the contact." That night I set an alarm for 2 a.m. and kept the phone on the coffee table like an exhibit. When the digits rolled to 2:13 a.m. exactly, it vibrated again. No ringtone this time, just a soft buzz as though the phone already knew the house was sleeping. I swiped before the second buzz. "Mark, I'm here." Hiss, then the same measured question. "What are they doing with my body?" The voice lacked any urgency, no fear, no confusion. It was as if he were politely rechecking a reservation detail. I tried speaking quickly, explaining that he was safe in the hospital, that nothing was happening, but I heard myself babbling. The call ended mid-sentence. 4 seconds. I opened the call info. Incoming, unknown carrier metadata, origin still Marcel. The next day I asked his primary physician whether brain-dead patients could exhibit vocal activity. He described rare autonomic reflexes, grimaces, twitches, but speech? Impossible. His larynx is bypassed, he reminded me, pointing to the trach tube. Air doesn't pass the vocal cords. He must have thought the grief was curdling. His hand hovered near my shoulder but never quite touched. On the drive home, I imagined Mark suspended between two worlds, conscious yet entombed, pushing his voice into circuits because breath no longer obeyed. The thought left me shivering behind the wheel. I skipped work, bought coffee so strong it filmed my teeth, and waited again. When the phone rang that third night, I recorded it on speaker. The hiss, the question. Only this time, after I swallowed panic and asked who was they, a new sound seeped through the static, something like distant humming, mechanical, rhythmic, almost wet. Then the call dropped. My recording app time-stamped 6 seconds. I played it back. The new noise reminded me of suction tubes or a saw hitting bone in the horror films Mark loved. I threw on jeans and drove to the hospital at 3 a.m., half ready to burst through staff doors and tear down the vent tubing myself. Instead, I found the ward dim, nurses sipping coffee at their station. Mark lay exactly as I'd left him, machines blinking innocently, rhythm steady. But an IV bag had been changed. A new clear fluid twinkled under the monitor lights. A tag read trial infusion, HCT 42, and a small logo I didn't recognize, Videra Therapeutics, curved beneath. Research medication? They hadn't mentioned any trials. I snapped a photo of the label, heart hammering. As I did, one of the monitors spiked, letting out a single shrill alarm. A nurse hurried over, but by the time she checked, the numbers settled. She glanced at me. Just a hiccup, she said, adjusting a sensor on his index finger. Happens sometimes when patients shift. Mark had not shifted. He couldn't. Back home, dawn bleeding through blinds, I hunted Videra Therapeutics online. Their site was glossy but sparse, promises of cutting-edge neural regeneration and ethical advancement. No public trials, no press releases, and the contact email bounced. I was still scrolling cached snippets when exhaustion finally smothered me on the couch. I woke in the late afternoon to a voicemail alert. I never heard the phone ring. The message was 14 seconds, too long for the usual spam. I pressed play. Soft static, then Mark, clearer than before, as though bandwidth had widened. They took something out, he said, voice flat, like he was reading instructions off a card. A short pause, and a wet scrape that made my stomach knot. Tell Mom I'm sorry if I don't wake up. Silence. I replayed it 3 times, memorizing each breath. The timestamp read 9:17 m.m. during morning rounds. I pictured a technician tilting his head on the pillow, grisly tools glinting under halogen as Mark spoke through some unseen channel. And I kept picturing that until my hands trembled too badly to hold the phone. That night I didn't wait for 2:13 a.m. I drove back to County General armed with coffee and a lie about delivering Mark's favorite blanket. Security buzzed me in. The ward lights were low for shift change, only a skeletal crew padded between rooms. I slipped into Mark's room, blanket folded over my arm but eyes fixed on the infusion bag, HCT 42 now half empty. Under its label another sticker, property of Videra Clinical, do not discard. A clipboard hung at the foot of the bed. I thumbed through charts until foreign acronyms blurred. Then movement flickered in peripheral vision, Mark's hand, or maybe just the reflection of the pulse ox light. I leaned closer. His eyelids fluttered, tiny, almost imperceptible twitches. For a mad second I thought he might wake. Then the ventilator jerked, coughing out a stuttered wheeze. Alarms shrilled. I stumbled back as nurses burst in, ordering me aside. I retreated into the hall, heart jackhammering, while they silenced machines and adjusted settings. One eyed me like I was a trespasser. Family visitation hours are over, sir. I heard an alarm. I managed. She guided me out, clipboard shielding whatever numbers flickered behind her. Doors swished shut. The elevator ride down smelled of disinfectant and carpet glue. In the lobby, I straightened my reflection in the dark glass of the vending machines, then remembered reflections were pointless comforts. Outside, the December air tasted metallic. I sat in my car until the dashboard clock crept past midnight, wondering who they were, what they'd taken. and why a company that didn't officially exist needed my cousin's comatose body. At 2:13 a.m. exactly, the phone rang. I answered without greeting. "They're opening me," Mark whispered. "Don't let them finish." The call ended. 4 seconds. My own reflection in the windshield, ghostly in moonlight, stared back with wide, frightened eyes. I started the engine. The steering wheel was slick with condensation by the time I reached my apartment, somewhere between the hospital parking lot and my building. Dawn had smeared the sky into dull, bruised pastels. I killed the engine but kept the radio on low. Talk show murmurs for company while I paced the living room, replaying Mark's last whisper, "Don't let them finish." The words felt less like a plea than a countdown, as though an unseen hand had already started turning a crank. I needed facts, not second-hand web scraps and night shift rumors. Videra Therapeutics listed a regional office 2 towns over, in a half-vacant industrial park wedged between a shuttered plastics plant and an indoor shooting range. At 9 sharp I pulled into its lot. The windows were mirrored glass, cheap tint, not literal mirrors, so it didn't trigger the superstitions we both mocked when we were kids. But inside I saw only blank cubicles and flickering screensavers. A paper notice taped to the entrance read, "Move to Suite 4B." Suite 4B turned out to be the former mailroom. 1 metal desk, no computer, and a lone receptionist whose name tag said heiress. She flipped through a clipboard while apologizing that all inquiries required an appointment through the portal. I asked about HCT 42. She hesitated just long enough for me to taste the lie forming. "We don't handle clinical inventory on site," she said, eyes darting to a door marked staff only. My question about trial subjects earned a brittle smile and a printed brochure. 5 glossy pages of stock photos, joggers, grandparents, smiling kids with stethoscopes. "We restore tomorrow," the slogan promised in bold italics. On the way out, I circled the back lot. A refrigerated box truck idled by the loading dock. 2 men in white Tyvek suits sliding stainless steel tubs up a ramp. Each tub wore a yellow biohazard triangle, and beneath that, a crisp Videra logo. The suits weren't the usual hospital whites. They looked more like quarantine gear. I ducked behind a dumpster and snapped pictures until a cough from the dock made me flinch. One of the men, mask off, face flushed, was staring in my direction. I retreated to the car and peeled away, heart battering my ribs so hard I thought I might black out. Back in town, I went straight to Mark's mother's house. She answered in slippers and a cardigan, eyes puffy and red but sharper than I'd seen in weeks. When I mentioned Videri, she stiffened. "That's the research foundation the hospital said would cover some costs," she murmured, sifting through a drawer cluttered with envelopes. She produced a carbon copy consent form. Her signature was neatly printed, but the date read 2 days after Mark's crash, the same day she'd been sedated for panic attacks in the ER lounge. Someone had forged her name. Her hands trembled as she studied the paper. "Is this why they keep changing his medication without telling me?" she asked. There was a brittle anger in her voice that hadn't existed before, anger that gave me permission to show her the voicemail. She listened once, pressed a fist to her mouth, then asked me to leave the phone on speaker while she called the hospital administrator. We spent an hour routed through extensions, each new voice assuring U.S. clinical partnerships were strictly vetted. No one could explain the trial infusion. No one even acknowledged HCT 42. Finally, a legal liaison promised an in-person meeting to clarify any misunderstandings tomorrow at 10 a.m. It was after dusk when I got home, drained but wired. I uploaded the truck photos and ran Mark's voicemails through free audio software, scrubbing until the static peeled away. Beneath the hiss lay rhythmic squelches, 3 pulses, pause, 3 pulses, pause, at 68 beats per minute. It wasn't a saw, it was a human heart. I overlaid a sample ECG I found online. The peaks matched too cleanly to be coincidence. He was broadcasting his own heartbeat from somewhere inside the hospital. At 2:13 a.m. my phone buzzed. I answered on the first trill. "Mark, I'm here." Silence at first, punctuated by the same wet cadence. Then he spoke, slower now, as though the act cost him something. They took tissue, a weak breath, Said I won't need it soon. Metal clinked, fabric rustled. Don't let them turn me off. What are they after? What did they take? I tried to keep my voice steady, but fear made it crack like cheap veneer. You remember Lake Paloma? He asked suddenly. I blinked, thrown. Our childhood fishing spot, miles west of town. Look, near the pump house, the call cut. 7 seconds, longer every night, as though whatever conduit carried him grew stronger even while his body dwindled. Sunrise smeared pale light across frost-laced rooftops while I searched online archives for Lake Paloma. The pump house had been decommissioned over a decade ago, but a local forum mentioned recent construction, Vidir again, leasing property for water quality research. I printed directions and drove, leaving tire tracks on gravel roads until cedars crowded both sides. The pump house was a concrete bunker perched beside a stagnant inlet, its door padlocked. Around back, new pipes snaked into the soil, disappearing beneath the building. No security fence, just keep out placards that looked designed to discourage hikers, not determine trespassers. I pried a window frame with a tire iron and slipped inside. Stale air reeked of bleach and something coppery. The interior was gutted, generators hummed where pumps once churned. Cables fed into an insulated room plastered with sound-dampening foam. Inside, stainless tables held pinkish slabs sealed in translucent bags, each marked with patient barcodes and dates, all within the last month. A freezer chest, frost blooming at its seal, word in the corner. I lifted the lid and gagged. Floating in gel solution were sections of what looked like lung tissue, trimmed neatly like butcher cuts. On top lay a folded surgical gown still blotched with rust-brown specks. I snapped photos until cold stung my knuckles. Then a door slammed somewhere inside the bunker. Voices, footsteps. I killed the flashlight, heart hammering, and slipped behind a row of tanks. 2 silhouettes passed the foam-lined doorway, one in a lab coat, one in Tyvek. They argued in hushed Spanish about batch viability and degeneration curves. The lab coat mentioned a deadline, 32 hours before necrosis sets in. Their footsteps receded toward the outer hall. I waited full minutes, lungs burning, before edging to the window. The men were loading a cooler into an unmarked van. As the vehicle pulled away, I caught the license plate on my phone. Back home, adrenaline seeped out, leaving a hollow shiver. I cataloged photos, tissue samples dated yesterday, the cooler tags reading CFM. My inbox pinged, a calendar invite from the hospital's legal liaison, stakeholder consultation regarding patient in A113 Mark Baker. Attached was a document labeled Advanced Directive Update, unsigned but timestamped for tomorrow. Someone planned to modify his life support order. At 11:58 p.m., a new email appeared from an address ending in invitarethera.bio. Subject, do not interfere. No body text, only a single image, a grainy still of me inside the pump house, flashlight beam frozen mid-arc. They had cameras, perhaps real-time alerts. Fear spidered across my spine, but beneath it, anger hardened. I packed a duffel, bolt cutters, duct tape, 2 changes of clothes. I didn't have a plan, only momentum. At 1:50 a.m. I parked 3 blocks from the hospital, using side streets to avoid cameras. An employee smoking by the ambulance bay propped the door with his foot. I slipped in behind him, head down, visitor badge from last week clipped to my collar. The basement smelled of laundry steam and antiseptic. I followed the duct line ceiling towards storage wing C, the origin point stamped on the IV tag photo. Inside, rolling cages of equipment lined concrete walls. At the far end, a steel double door clicked each time the fluorescent overhead flickered, a keypad controlled access. I stared at its greasy numbers, then remembered Mark's heart pattern. 3 pulses, pause, 3 pulses, pause. I typed 3,333, red light. I tried 6,868, is BPM baseline minus diastolic memory from our soccer days. still red. Doors remained inert while minutes drained toward 213. Then my pocket vibrated. Mark was calling early. I answered, whispering, "I'm in the basement, keypad locked. Help me." Static. The line stuttered, then a new sound, a rapid sequence of beeps. It took a beat to realize he was transmitting tones. 4, pause, 1, pause, 3, 2. I punched 4132. Green light blinked. The latch clunked open. The room beyond was chilled like a morgue. Racks of sealed caskets, medical-grade polycarbonate built with ports for IVs and electrical leads, lined both walls. Blue LEDs traced icy veins across transparent lids. Inside each pod lay a motionless figure, intubated but otherwise intact, eyes taped, torsos swaddled in gauze. Some were missing limbs. One pod cradled only a torso, machinery feeding tubes where legs had been. Every face looked mid-expression, as if frozen mid-sentence. Mark's pod was center row, third from the end. His cheeks were sunken, color ashen, but unmistakably him. Sensor wires wrapped both temples, feeding into a console flashing green scripts faster than I could read. The screen title, Neural Externalization Protocol, Live. A port in the pod's side ran a thick coaxial cable through the ceiling, likely piggybacking the hospital's phone lines. A tag on the cable jacket read Telemetric Thought Stream. My stomach lurched. They hadn't resurrected his voice, they had hijacked his synaptic signals, converting thought into audio. I fumbled for the pod release, hands numb with cold. Alarms would trip the moment I unsealed it, but hesitation felt like betrayal. I slid back the latch. The lid hissed open, sub-zero fog billowed out, wreathing his body. An EKG immediately began screaming, red numbers spiking like fireworks. Down the hall, heavy boots pounded concrete. I gripped Mark's shoulder, skin icy but pliant. "Mark, I'm here. We're leaving." His eyelids spasmed open, dull irises fixed on mine for the first time since the crash, pupils contracting like they'd finally fought their way through syrup. His lips parted around the vent tube. No sound emerged, but a vibration pulsed under my fingers, an acknowledgement or a warning. Footsteps closed in. Red strobes began sweeping the storage wing. Overhead, the speaker system barked code gray sublevel C. All units respond. I wedged the pod latch with a tire iron, then yanked the tube from his mouth. Fluid splattered my sleeve. His back arched in silent agony, or maybe reflex. I hauled him upright, tubing ripping free, monitors shrieking. The cable in his skull snapped, sparks patterned across the console, and the screens went dark. Mark sagged against me, weight limp but somehow willing. We had seconds. I half dragged, half carried him toward the exit, alarms colliding overhead in discordant wails. Behind us, the other pods began to thrum and flicker, as if stirred by his escape. One lid cracked open with a brittle pop. A woman's eyes fluttered, and I caught a hoarse whisper, "Don't leave us." Boots rounded the corridor corner. I tightened my grip on Mark, lungs blazing, and barreled through the door into the labyrinth of laundry shafts and boiler pipes. Anywhere but here, anywhere before the men in Tyvek sealed the hall. Sirens built a migraine inside my skull as we fled, but Mark, despite the tubes still dangling from his veins, managed one breathy word in my ear, "Home?" And for the first time since the ditch, it wasn't through a phone line. I stumbled through the sub-basement service corridor, half dragging, half carrying Mark's weight across my shoulders. His bare feet scraped concrete, leaving smears of pink where tubing dripped a solution that smoked faintly on the cold floor. Every exit sign down here glowed the same sickly green, but none of the heavy doors actually opened. Most were welded shut or chained from the other side. Whoever designed this level hadn't planned on anyone needing to get out fast. Somewhere behind us, the code gray siren cut and was replaced by the hard clatter of radios, short clipped orders that ricocheted through the ductwork. South stairwell sealed. Contact Dr. Ritchie. Negative on ICU. Last sighting sub-C. They didn't use Mark's name. He'd already become inventory to them, a walking asset leak instead of a person. He coughed, a thin, wet bark that sounded more like a drain unclogging than breath. I tightened my grip, turned a corner, and nearly collided with a laundry cart mountain of soiled sheets. The cart blocked a double swing door stamped delivery elevator, no passengers. A quick shove toppled linens across the threshold, and we squeezed through. The elevator cab sat open, its floor lined with slatted wood to keep dripping bags from puddling. I hesitated just long enough to scan the panel. Only 2 buttons, B and 4. I hammered 4. The doors shuddered, screeched along warped rails, and began to rise. Mark sagged against the wall, eyelids fluttering. "Stay awake," I hissed. He blinked, pupils still tiny pinholes, but he managed a gravelly whisper that vibrated more in his throat than in the air. "Still hear them. All of them." His knuckles tightened around a dangling IV tube like it might anchor him. A banging below reverberated through the shaft. Someone had pried the basement doors and was climbing the maintenance ladder. I imagined rubber soles on steel rungs, baton in one hand, pistol maybe in the other. The cab crept upward. Old freight motors never got retrofits, and every passing second felt like a coin toss. Floor 2. Lights flickered and a chemical smell, ammonia, seeped. Through the gate. Floor 3. A hollow thunk sounded on the cab roof, a boot heel maybe. I braced for gunmetal to punch through, but the thunk slid off, followed by a distant clatter down the shaft. Either they slipped, or they'd dropped something to gauge our position. The control panel had no stop switch, no emergency brake I could yank. All I could do was wedge Mark against the corner, spread myself in front of him, and pray the doors opened before the shaft lid did. With a final groan, the cab halted. The 4 lights stuttered, then steadied. I forced the gates apart. It took both arms and most of my weight, and we spilled onto a loading bay lined with linen cages and mop buckets. No guards yet. "This way," Mark rasped. He pointed, not at an exit sign, but toward a narrow custodial chute. Logic said head for daylight, but part of me trusted whatever internal compass he'd built while trapped in that pod. We limped down concrete steps to an ankle-deep crawl space alive with boiler heat. Water trickled somewhere, and overhead pipes hissed like startled cats. The passage burrowed west beneath the parking deck. Yellow arrows marked fire main valves and HVAC cleanouts. After 20 yards, I thought we'd dead-ended, but Mark gestured toward a ventilation grate half his width. "Won't fit," I muttered. He swallowed, voice a broken reed. "It opens." The screws weren't real, they hid spring pins. One yank and the panel lifted out like a door. Beyond lay a service alcove barely big enough to crouch in, but at its back an aged brick wall showed a ragged hole the size of a dog door, broken masonry dust on the floor. "How did you—" "Security drills," he wheezed, as if those words were obvious. Of course, he'd worked maintenance stints in high school, knew county blueprints the way other kids knew cheat codes. I shoved our bags through first, then helped him crawl. Sharp brick tore my jacket. A jutting rebar barbed my scapula. Mark's hospital gown snagged and peeled half open, exposing stitched incisions across his lower ribs, each one puckered and red. They'd taken more than tissue. I clenched down a wave of nausea and kept moving. We emerged in a storm runoff culvert barely 4 feet high. Cold, fetid water lapped around our shins, January runoff laced with who knew what. Night wind howled faintly from the far end, inviting and icy. Before slogging toward it, I propped Mark against the concrete barrel and rifled my duffel for the bolt cutters and duct tape. "Need you walking," I said. He nodded once, jaw clenched, while I ripped the remaining IV line from his arm and wrapped tape tight over the spurting pinprick. He'd lost enough blood or saline already. Any more and he'd fold. We ditched the gown, wrapping him in my spare flannel and a garbage bag poncho. He shivered, but color nudged back into his lips. Flashlights glimmered at the culvert mouth behind us. Security had found the grate. We slogged forward, splash echo telling them exactly where we were. The passage jogged left, rose into a narrower pipe barely big enough for shoulders. Knees scraped rebar ridges. Mark's breath wheezed like bagpipes losing air. Every 10 yards I glanced back, expecting halogen glare. None yet. Maybe they feared confined spaces. Maybe protocols forbid lethal pursuit this deep off-grid. Or maybe they were cutting us off topside. After an eternity, the pipe spat us into an open concrete ditch behind a shuttered strip mall a block from my building. Snow-dusted parking stripes, sodium street lamps painted everything orange. Sirens still wailed back toward the hospital, but no cruisers prowled here yet. We tottered across asphalt, using dumpsters as cover until we breached my stairwell. Second-floor hall reeked of curry and cat litter. My palms snagged the doorknob like magnets. Safe, for the moment. Inside, I flicked one lamp, killed the rest. Mark collapsed onto the couch, eyes shut but lips moving, twitching like shortwave antennae scanning stations only he could hear. "I have to close the line," he murmured. "What line?" He touched the small wound near his temple where the coax connector had been sutured. "They can still trace, still listen. Needs something, shield." His hand swept weakly toward the kitchen. I rummaged until foil crinkled under my fingers, a roll of heavy-duty aluminum, leftover holiday turkey pan lining. I wrapped it around his head like a lopsided helmet, pinching seams tight. Ridiculous, maybe, but the moment the foil sealed, his shoulders slackened and a sigh fluttered out, a physical relief like pressure easing in a vent. Whether placebo or Faraday, it worked enough. He slept within seconds. I barred the door, shoved furniture tight, pulled curtains. Then I opened the laptop, loaded photos from the pump house and pod room, and composed an email blast. News desks, medical watchdog blogs, whistleblower drop boxes. I attached everything. IV tag images, forged consent form, the van plate, audio files of his calls. Subject line: unlicensed human vivisection at T County General, urgent proof. I typed until my fingers cramped, hit send, and sat back expecting instant catharsis. Instead, the email bounced. Every address. User unknown, mailbox full, server error. Even my cloud drive link returned file removed for policy violation. I tried forwarding to myself. That bounced too. Something upstream, ISP backbone filter, maybe deeper, was intercepting. Videre's net was wider than I'd guessed. Phone buzzed. Unknown number this time, not Mark's. A text popped up. You have something that belongs to us. Location services toggled off by itself, little arrow icon flashing. I powered down, yanked the SIM, smashed it under my heel. Paranoia felt insufficient. I taped over webcams, unplugged smart plugs, killed the breaker to the Wi-Fi router. Mark stirred near dawn. Fever glazed his eyes. I pressed a palm to his forehead, burning. The improvised headpiece was damp, condensation pooled inside. Infection maybe, or withdrawal from whatever cocktail kept him stable in cryo. I cracked ibuprofen into applesauce, fed him by teaspoon until he managed a hoarse thanks. Then he tried to sit up. Not yet, I said. Have to finish. His tongue stuck on the words. They harvest consciousness, data. My brain reeled. Organ trade was nightmare enough, but harvesting thoughts? He nodded. They freeze tissue but stream neural patterns. Upscale them. Corporate patents. He drifted, then snapped back. Bodies die. Patterns live. AI scaffolds. Another coughing fit. I steadied him as he gagged up bile so dark it looked black. They'll erase residual if they lose the asset. His gaze locked onto mine with chilling clarity. Means they'll come for you too. As if cued, a thunk sounded down the hall, elevator doors opening. My building never saw traffic before noon. An echo of measured footsteps followed, too synchronized for just neighbors. I killed the lamp, crossed to the peephole. 2 men in charcoal suits stood outside 2B, pretending to knock, identical briefcases, earpieces glinting. Not police. These moved like private contractors, body armor bulk under jackets. I hissed at Mark. He rolled to his knees, heartbeat hammering under my grip. We slipped through the apartment's back window onto the fire escape, descended icy rungs past sleeping units. Below, the alley stretched between chain-link fences already gleaming blue with dawn. As we reached asphalt, an upstairs door slammed, voices barked. I didn't look back. We cut through dumpsters, climbed the retaining wall onto Riverside Avenue. Morning commuters idled at red lights, oblivious. I scanned for tails, none obvious yet, but a black SUV idled half a block behind, exhaust pluming. Its windows were midnight tint, no plates on the front. Mark tugged my sleeve, nodding across the street toward the riverfront bus terminal. Crowded, cameras, unpredictable routes, good cover. We jogged, merging with commuters queuing for the 5:40 to Milton. As the bus hissed its doors open, I glanced back. The SUV rolled forward, a passenger side window lowered 2 inches, just enough for a lens. We squeezed into the rear. Diesel rumble shivered through the floor, and city blocks began scrolling past. The SUV didn't follow. Maybe they couldn't risk a public snatch. Still, every rider who glanced our way felt suspicious. I adjusted Mark's foil helmet under a hoodie, wiped sweat from his brow. He managed a thin smile that collapsed into a grimace. "Lake," he whispered. "Finish where?" "Started." Milton lay 20 miles from Lake Paloma. If we switched buses twice and hitched the last leg, we could reach the old pump house again by noon, circle back, hit them where they stored the evidence, maybe find a terminal that hadn't been purged. Risky, but stalling guaranteed they'd corner us eventually. I squeezed his hand. "We burn it all," I said. He closed his eyes, and for the first time the corners of his mouth curved, tired, but sure. Outside, the dawn kept paling, washing color from the world as if prepping it for erasure. Behind us somewhere, Videra's people reset their chessboard. Ahead, frost-dusted pines pointed the way to a lake that might hold the last proof my cousin was alive at all. Your move, I thought, as the bus shuddered onto the highway. We changed buses twice before noon, each transfer pushing us deeper into the rural sprawl, where signals died and trees leaned like sentinels over the road. I bought burner phones from a truck stop vending machine, paid cash for gas station ponchos to mask our faces, and stole a first aid kit from an unattended firehouse porch. Mark's fever held steady, but he no longer twitched or murmured. His energy came in flashes now, bright moments of lucidity followed by long, waxen silences. I watched his chest rise, slow but steady, and silently timed each breath. By the time we reached the outer Forest Service road, the air had turned sharper, colder. The last bus dropped us at the edge of an unpaved trail. It would have been picturesque once, pine needles softening the path, a trickle of meltwater murmuring nearby. But today the forest felt expectant. We were the only thing moving, and the stillness leaned in. Lake Paloma hadn't been on any real maps in years. It wasn't drained or fenced off, just abandoned, the way places sometimes were when their purpose dried up. The old pump house came into view like a carcass, squat, crumbling, roof bowed inward where a branch had fallen and rotted in place. The pipes outside were still new, though. Steel coils buried into the earth like surgical instruments. Someone had been here recently, maybe even this morning. I half expected the door to be locked again. It wasn't. Inside, the air was colder than outside, thick with the scent of wet stone and rotting insulation. The generator hum was gone. Someone had shut it down, maybe as cleanup, maybe as bait. I took a flashlight from the duffel and scanned the room. The stainless steel tables were gone, just drag marks and faint stains on the concrete. The freezer chest still sat in the corner, but the lid had been duct taped shut. The walls had fresh holes now, where equipment had been unbolted in a rush. Whoever came back to cover the trail hadn't had time to scrub everything. A paper scrap caught under a vent. I unfolded it, a time-stamped checklist labeled CFM dump sequence, final. It included our hospital's name and the initials MB, Mark Baker. I handed him the paper. His fingers trembled over it, recognition flickering. Then he looked up. Below, he croaked. "There's more?" I asked. He nodded and limped toward the back wall. There had always been a panel there, but now the drywall had been stripped, revealing a locked hatch inset into the foundation. I tapped it, hollow. This wasn't part of the original blueprints. This had been dug out later, quietly. "I don't suppose you have the code," I muttered. He gave me a tired half grin. "Still hear the pulses?" I pulled out the burner phone, opened the sound recorder app and held it near him. He hummed, 3 long tones, pause, 2 quick blips, pause, 1 low warble. I converted the tones into digits. 321. I keyed it in. The lock clicked. The hatch opened on a rust-stained ladder vanishing into dark. "Can you climb?" I asked. He shook his head. So I climbed first, then helped him down inch by inch, every rung a grunted breath. At the bottom, a corridor dug straight into clay and lined with salvaged metal sheets. Wires ran along the walls, loosely stapled, feeding a single row of low halogen strips overhead. At the end of the corridor was a door. It was open. Beyond it, not a lab, not storage, but a room of silence and glass pods. 10 of them humming softly, each one housing a person, suspended, sleeping but intact. Old men, teenagers, a middle-aged woman with the same streak of gray as Mark's mother. Tubes fed from their mouths and into a central tank that hissed with pale mist. Above them, a server array blinked with a slow, lazy heartbeat. "They made backups," Mark whispered. The files had names, tags, numerical hashes. I recognized a few by their initials. Disappeared patients the local forums had obsessed over. One had gone missing last year, another 10 years ago. Mark limped forward and pointed to a console. "Help me. I can log in. How do you even know?" "They taught me," he said hollowly. While I slept, we reached the console. His fingers hovered above the keys, twitching like puppet strings. He typed slowly. A UI loaded, rudimentary admin-level access. Vidair Archive Node 4 billions. Operations Hub, Paloma, Neural Ingestion, Active, Export Path, Central Core Remote. I scanned the directory names, pattern extractions, memory sinks, m-baker_context.tsv. Then one folder caught my eye, excise pending, inside mb_kill.py. I opened it, a code string designed to wipe everything linked to Mark's identity. Neural print, voice files, cell log routes, even synthetic DNA data. Time-stamped for 2:13 a.m. tonight. "They're planning to erase you completely," I said. He nodded. "Once the body dies, they finish the transfer and purge the original." I hovered over the keyboard. "We delete everything. We burn the server." He stopped me. "Not yet." His eyes rested on one pod, a girl no older than 10, braids floating in blue light. "My niece," he whispered. "They took her 3 weeks ago. Told my sister it was a flu death." My hands clenched. "We save her?" He looked away. "She's already gone. Just a copy now." And for the first time, I understood. They weren't saving people. They were duplicating them, scanning their neural layouts, uploading them into predictive AI, and then discarding the real thing. No living host needed to survive. Vidair wasn't healing minds. It was replacing them. Mark pointed to another command file, burn.all.exe. "No backups," he said. "No resurrection." I clicked. A red progress bar filled the screen. Heat bloomed from the server racks. Fans screamed. Somewhere beneath us, coolant systems failed. One pod began to fog, its inner pressure warping the glass. We climbed fast. The fire suppression mist triggered below, but it wasn't enough. As we reached the pump house again, black smoke billowed from the hatch, chased by the whine of melting circuits. Mark turned to look one last time. "Tell them," he said. "I already did. They'll try to silence me." "They will," he said. "But now there's no asset left to protect." We walked into the woods. By the time we reached the highway again, distant sirens had started, probably automated, tied to the blaze. No one came for us that night. No vans, no suits. Videre scrubbed their website within the week. County General announced a partnership restructuring. The hospital's research wing quietly closed. And Mark died in his sleep 10 days later, peacefully, no monitors, no wires. He never called again. But sometimes, when I wake in the early hours and reach for my phone, I still half expect it to buzz at 2:13. And if it does, I'm not sure I'll answer. I buried Mark in a quiet cemetery a few towns over, the kind with moss-choked headstones and no online presence. There was no funeral, no obituary, just me, a shovel, and a sky swollen with rain that never quite fell. I'd wrapped his body in the thickest blanket I owned and sealed it in a contractor-grade tarp. No autopsy, no death certificate. I couldn't risk his remains being flagged, tested, taken. As far as the system knew, he was still asleep on life support. I left no marker, just a patch of disturbed soil under a crooked cedar tree. But I visit once a week, sometimes less. I don't bring flowers, I bring silence. He'd earned that much. After the fire at Lake Paloma, I waited for the hammer to drop. I kept moving, never sleeping in the same place twice. I used burner phones, cash, a different name in every motel. I expected men in Tyvek suits to yank me off the street. Expected Videre to black bag me or worse, erase me like they tried to erase him. But no one came. That was the worst part. For a while I thought maybe we'd won. The fire had destroyed their archives, right? No backups, no living bodies, no neural prints left to steal or store. I told myself their entire operation had been built around that one site, that one server cluster. That without it, the rest would collapse like a lung without air. I told myself lies to fall asleep. Then the emails started. Not to me, to journalists, whistleblower sites, government watchdogs, from accounts claiming to be M. Baker. Each message was short, polite, just like his phone calls. "What are they doing with my body? Do you know where I went after they closed the line? Can you prove I'm not still alive somewhere?" No attachments, no traceable metadata, just his name, his voice. Sometimes the same old question, why am I still dreaming? It didn't make sense. I saw him die. I buried him. I torched the servers. I watched the smoke crawl into the trees. But something had survived. At first I thought it was a cruel trick. Someone had copied his old voicemails. But then came the voicemail to my new number, a number I hadn't given to anyone. It arrived on a Thursday just after 2:13 a.m. "Hey," Mark said. His voice was clearer than ever, no static, no stutter. I remember now, the man in the coat. He said I wouldn't even notice, said I'd just feel like I was dreaming forever. But I do notice, every second, every silence, every time someone opens the door and I'm not there. A pause. Then, I don't think I'm the only one. That night, I didn't sleep. I turned off all the lights, sat in the middle of the motel room floor and tried not to breathe. When the power went out at exactly 2:13 a.m. the next night, I didn't wait for the call. I smashed the phone, burned it in the sink. Didn't matter. The next night my tablet buzzed. No network connection, no apps open, just an alert blinking in the corner of the screen. Incoming transmission, MB redundant archive. I threw the tablet into the tub, turned on the water, and left. Didn't pack, didn't pay, just drove. I stayed ahead of it for a while, a week here, 4 days there. But wherever I went, truck stops, diners, cheap libraries with free internet, I started noticing the same glitch, same pattern. Every screen, every display, every unsecured signal I brushed past. 2:13 a.m. Sometimes it was a flicker, sometimes a flash of text that vanished before I could screenshot. But always that time, always those initials. M. Baker. It's been months now. I haven't used my real name since the night I fled the hospital. I keep to the edges, sleep during the day, never stay anywhere long enough to learn the floor plan. And no matter where I go, I keep a clock beside me, because the only defense I have anymore, the only choice I still get to make, is whether or not I'm awake when 2:13 rolls around. Because I know that one night, a message won't come through a screen. It'll come from behind a door, a knock I won't answer, a voice I can't shut out, a question I can't escape. What are they doing with my body? And when that night comes, I don't know if I'll still be me,